Imagine waking up tomorrow and discovering that fuel prices have suddenly skyrocketed. Stock markets are falling. Cargo ships have stopped moving. Governments are holding emergency meetings. The entire world is watching one tiny stretch of water.
A place most people have never even heard of, the Strait of Hormuz. But why does this small waterway hold so much power? Let's break down the real truth. This is where we analyze the facts. So make sure to like and subscribe and watch more informative videos right here.
Picture this. You wake up on a random Tuesday and literally 1/5 of the entire world's energy supply has just vanished from the market. It sounds like the plot of a dystopian movie, right? But this isn't fiction. This is exactly what went down in March 2026 when one tiny, incredibly narrow stretch of water became the epicenter of a massive geopolitical earthquake. In this explainer, we're going to map out the anatomy of that global crisis. We'll look at how a highly localized shutdown managed to basically bring our interconnected global economy to its knees, and what that reveals about just how fragile our modern world really is. To really grasp this, we have to start with one staggering number: 95%. Within mere days of the crisis kicking off, shipping activity through the Strait of Hormuz, which is arguably the world's most critical energy choke point, plummeted by 95%. We're talking about a bustling superhighway of global commerce turning into a virtual ghost town practically overnight. The sheer scale of that disruption is honestly hard to even wrap your head around. In the immediate aftermath, you had over 150 massive commercial ships just stuck, stranded in the water. It brought a sudden and shocking halt to 1/5 of the world's oil and 1/4 of its liquefied natural gas. Thousands of seafarers were suddenly caught in the crossfire, and those invisible global logistics chains that keep our modern lives running were just abruptly severed. So you gotta wonder, how does a single waterway hold so much power over the entire planet? To answer that, we really have to zoom in on the unique, incredibly cramped geography of the region, because this isn't the open ocean we're talking about. This is a very specific, highly vulnerable bottleneck. Think about it this way. The transit lanes that these massive, lumbering supertankers rely on run just outside the 12 nautical mile limit of territorial waters. That means every single ship passing through is well within direct range of coastal artillery, anti-ship missiles, and cheap advanced drones. Military analysts will tell you don't even need a massive naval armada to block this strait. Just 2 well-placed attacks can completely paralyze global trade. And because the geography is so tight, forcing it back open isn't just a matter of signing a diplomatic treaty. It requires a massive, full-scale military operation. And that geography perfectly sets up the incredibly tense standoff that triggered the 2026 shutdown. On one side, you have U.S. naval patrols and multinational coalitions actively fighting to maintain freedom of navigation, which is pretty much the bedrock of global trade. On the other side, you have an Iranian strategy focused squarely on access denial through hybrid warfare. It's a highly calculated game of strategic leverage, where the waterway itself is the weapon. Now, if this scenario is starting to sound a little familiar, it's because, well, history really does repeat itself. We've actually been here before, but this time around it comes with a highly dangerous modern twist that has cranked the stakes up higher than ever. Recent academic analysis, like this deep dive from the International Journal of Arts and Humanities, points out how the 2026 crisis is essentially a direct cyclical evolution of the infamous tanker war back in the 1980s during the Iran-Iraq conflict. The core strategic logic, using maritime disruption to force economic pain, is exactly the same. But the tools they're using to do it, those have fundamentally changed. The contrast in how this was fought is wild. Back in the 80s, it was all about direct, kinetic attacks, naval mines and aircraft missiles aimed squarely at oil tankers. But the 2026 crisis, it relied heavily on highly sophisticated, often completely deniable drone strikes and cyber disruptions. And they weren't just going after oil anymore, they targeted broad commercial shipping, including container ships. It just goes to show that in today's hyper-globalized world, a lot more than just our oil supply is incredibly vulnerable. And we should be clear. This didn't just happen out of nowhere. It was a slow-motion collision. If you trace the timeline, the seizure of the MSC Ares commercial vessel back in 2024 really set the stage. That escalated into a wave of drone strikes throughout 2025, which absolutely panicked the maritime insurance markets. And that steady drumbeat is what finally culminated in the total shutdown in March 2026. The world basically watched it happen in real time, but couldn't stop it. But here is maybe the most fascinating and terrifying evolution of modern conflict. You don't actually need explosions to shut down a trade route anymore. The mere threat of a drone strike or a targeted cyber attack creates what experts call a psychological blockade. When shipping companies can't quantify the risk, insurance premiums skyrocket to totally impossible levels, and traffic just halts, purely through fear. The perception of danger has become quite literally just as powerful as physical force. So what actually happens to the rest of the world when a vital choke point like this closes? It is way bigger than just paying more at the gas pump. A policy brief from the Kiel Institute for the World Economy provides a really chilling look at this, exposing a hidden economic mechanism that directly links a conflict in the Middle East to the dinner tables of the world's most vulnerable people. It is basically the ultimate butterfly effect. First, when oil and liquefied natural gas get blocked, you have an immediate global energy disruption. That energy shortage then rapidly chokes off the production of chemicals and fertilizers, which heavily rely on natural gas. And finally, without those fertilizers, agricultural yields collapse worldwide. That cascades directly into a devastating, uncontrollable spike in global food prices. To give you a sense of the scale of that initial trigger, just look at the sheer volume of energy that was trapped. With 20% of the world's oil and a massive 25% of its LNG blocked, the shock to the system is immediate, it's profound, and it is completely impossible to replace overnight. And the timing of the March 2026 closure? Honestly, it literally could not have been worse. Hitting right at the absolute peak planting season for the Northern Hemisphere guaranteed that the resulting fertilizer shortage would cause widespread agricultural disruption for the entire year's crop cycle. It was an absolute perfect storm for global food security. But here is the really crucial point. Who actually pays the price for conflict in the Middle East? The disparity is shocking. The U.S. economy, it barely registers a dent, losing a tiny fraction of a percent, around 0.07. But meanwhile, energy and fertilizer-dependent nations in South Asia and sub-Saharan Africa end up suffering welfare losses that are 10 to 20 times greater. The crazy thing is, for years, standard economic trade models totally missed this dynamic. They analyzed trade in a vacuum, failing to realize how structural damage to global agriculture disproportionately crushes the world's poorest populations. A geopolitical standoff in the Gulf doesn't just mean a bad day on the stock market. It literally translates to starvation risks in Africa and South Asia. Now, knowing they have this massive, glaring vulnerability, regional powers and global markets aren't just sitting on their hands. They are actively, desperately trying to rewrite the map of global trade to bypass the Strait of Hormuz entirely. What we're watching unfold right now is a multi-billion-dollar race against geography itself. Nations are pouring vast fortunes into building alternative pipelines and carving out new overland trade corridors to just go around the choke point. Though, interestingly, the crisis has revealed some fascinating geopolitical loopholes. For instance, Chinese-flagged vessels carrying yuan-denominated cargo have actually been permitted sporadic passage through the strait. It's incredibly intriguing because it hints that entirely parallel, politically aligned economic systems are emerging right under our noses. Taking a step back from the immediate crisis, this single bottleneck totally exposes the terrifying fragility of our hyper-interconnected global trade network. We have spent decades building a system that is perfectly optimized for efficiency, but we totally forgot to build in any resilience. And you really can't look at the Strait of Hormuz in a vacuum, can you? It's deeply intertwined with other flashpoints, like the Red Sea disruptions by Yemen's Houthis. Add in the shifting alliances between China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea, and you have a global supply chain that is incredibly reactive. It proves that our old economic models, which just assumed a baseline of geopolitical stability, are totally outdated, in an era where one tiny regional spark can instantly set the global supply chain on fire. Which leaves us with one final, pretty urgent thought to consider. As the nature of warfare evolves away from traditional battleships and moves toward exploiting the invisible, fragile connections between our energy, our food, and our trade through hybrid and psychological tactics, can our global supply chains ever truly be safe?